wake me up to another good morning, time to go.
Are you ready to explore God's wild and wonderful world? Welcome to the Nat Theo podcast. I'm your host, Erin Lynham. I'm a certified master naturalist, Bible teacher, and author, and I am so excited to dive into God's written word, the Bible, and His created world with you. If I were to ask you what color a polar bear's fur is, how would you answer? I know when I found the answer to this question, I was very surprised. Today, we will discover the answer to that question, along with how that answer helps polar bears live well in a very harsh place called the Arctic. If you have not yet listened to our first Arctic episode, which aired last week, I recommend going back and listening to that episode first, because it's important to understand what the Arctic is like so that we can really be in awe of all the creatures that God designed to live there. As I have learned about the Arctic, I am even more in awe of our Creator God. That's what happens when we discover God's wild and wonderful world and all of its unique places and creatures. We stand in amazement. One way my family enjoys discovering God's designs in nature is with Apologia curriculum. This year with Apologia, we are studying the ocean, human anatomy and physiology, and how to use the scientific method and inquiry to learn more about creation. Apologia keeps science in its rightful place as theology, or the study of God, so we can, like Job 37:14 says, stop and consider the wondrous works of God. Consider God's wondrous works through Apologia's beautiful and fascinating textbooks and engaging student journals. Explore all of Apologia's curriculum and courses at apologia.com. Last week, my friend and biologist Jill Smith joined us to share about the Arctic and a caterpillar, as well as some amphibians that call the Arctic home. I am so glad to have Jill joining us again today to introduce us to some birds and mammals that brave the Arctic. Here's our trail map.
Are you ready?
We are going to learn about some birds that God designed to thrive in the Arctic, as well as some mammals that God created to live there also. We will learn what color is a polar bear's fur, and how does God's light help us live and thrive? Here is our trivia question. So we already know that we're going to learn about a polar bear's fur color, but the trivia question is, how long can a polar bear hold its breath for? Take a guess and we will find out at the end of today's episode. It is time to bring on our friend Jill Smith. Jill is a biologist, or a scientist who studies all the living things that God has made. She uses her knowledge and passion for science to point others to God. Jill does this through her beautiful book, Nature Unveiled, which you can grab a copy of at the link in our show notes. In fact, in that book, she has a wonderful chapter on Arctic foxes, which is really what inspired our 2 Arctic episodes. Jill also served as my science editor for my upcoming book, The Nature of Rest, which releases in May. And Jill is our curriculum writer, and she helps develop our Nat Theo Club science curriculum. All right, let's welcome Jill back as we discover some more amazing creatures that live in the Arctic. Jill, I am so excited to have you back on Nat Theo. Last week, you shared with us about the Arctic, really what this Arctic area of the world is like. And we learned it's very harsh to live there, but you also shared with us different plants and a very brave caterpillar who lives in the Arctic, as well as some amphibians that brave the Arctic. And so today I'm very excited to have you back on to share about some birds and mammals.
Yes, I'm so excited to be here again. I have just been spending so much time learning about the Arctic, and it's an amazing place. And I just want you to just feel like you're walking into it and know what it would be like to visit. I know one day I want to be there and see
Me
it for
too.
myself. That would be amazing.
Me too. You have definitely got me excited to go and visit it one day. Well, can you share with us about some of the birds that God has designed to live in the Arctic?
Well, most of the birds that are there leave. It's too cold for them.
I would
It's
also.
just too cold. There's not a lot of food to eat, and what food is there freezes, and the insects leave. So it's just a difficult, harsh environment, like you were saying. It's hard for birds, even though they are warm-blooded. It's hard for them to stay warm because they need food to be active. They can't just hibernate like some of the other animals do. And so they have to continue to find food. And so most of them migrate south to warmer climates where they can find food and they can survive the winter. And then they return to breed in the Arctic because there's not a lot of predators. And so they have this big open space to raise their young and feed them, and so they continue to come back year after year just to raise their young. So, but some of the birds that do exist, I'm going to talk about one that actually leaves, but it's such an amazing bird, and it's named after the Arctic. It's called an Arctic tern, and it has this love of summer and the sun. And so what it does is it leaves the Arctic when it's turning winter and goes down to Antarctica, which is becoming summer.
That's a really
So
long
it
trip.
it is over 11,000 miles.
Wow.
It is a long way. And now they may take lots of stops. It may be a zigzagged kind of, it's not a direct flight. It's not like a plane going from one place to another. They'll take stops along the way and feed but they will end up in the Antarctica. And when Antarctica starts to turn into winter, they will return to the Arctic for constant summer. They just love the warmth, and it also brings a lot of fish for them to eat. And the other bird that I want to talk about is the rock ptarmigan. And this bird actually stays in the Arctic. It is white in the winter, so it's got a great camouflage. Turns brown in the summer, so it's camouflaged with the rocks and the dirt. But it is produces lots of downy feathers, which traps air against their skin. So it traps the heat in that their body is producing, so that it doesn't just escape. These birds, like ducks, have oil glands that produce oil, and as they're preening their feathers, they're applying oil to their feathers, which keeps them flexible, and but it also protects them from the snow and the rain, so that doesn't get in through their feathers and cool down their body temperature. So that's really amazing. They also have feathers on their feet. And so it keeps their feet warm, but they also have feathers on their eyelids and in their
Oh, wow.
nostrils.
Whoa.
So they are able to create a lot of insulation with all these feathers trapping air. That is a fabulous insulator to hold in their heat that their body is creating. And then when a blizzard comes, they've got these great feet for digging, and they can dig a burrow in the snow and hide through the through the
No.
blizzard
They
that
make a
comes by.
snow fort?
Yes.
A bird that makes a snow fort. Wow.
Yep.
I love
And
that. Oh man, I had the opportunity to see a ptarmigan once in my life, And my husband and I, we were hiking here in Colorado, but we were way up high. We were about 13,000 feet of elevation, so way above where the trees grow, up on the tundra. And we were just hiking, and like you don't see much of anything alive up there, but we rounded this bend in the rocks, and there was a ptarmigan. And it was summer, so it had like the brown feathers. And she was just making all kinds of noise. And then we saw why, because from behind this little rock popped out her chicks, these little
Oh,
ptarmigan chicks that she was trying to protect. But I remember I didn't know anything about ptarmigans at the time, but I remember just thinking, wow, her legs are very fluffy because she had all of these feathers.
yes,
Wow.
yes. So that protects them. And they also have that counter current heat exchange,
Hmm.
like the ducks. We talked about the wood
Yeah,
duck,
yeah.
and that their arteries warm the cold blood leaving their feet. So that is really amazing. And so there's other birds that live there, like the raven and a variety of ducks and auks and fulmars and gulls. And so they have are able to continue to feed from the Arctic, and so that's why they're able to stay.
So interesting. So, all these different birds that God has designed to live in all these creative ways in the Arctic, including building a snow fort. I just love that. Okay, so you also told me that there are many mammals that live in the Arctic. So, a mammal being an animal that is warm blooded, a vertebrate, has a backbone, gives birth to live young, most of them, and nurses their babies with milk from their bodies. So these mammals. Now, I know there's one that is probably the most well known mammal in the Arctic would be the polar bear. And so I'm excited to learn about polar bears, including I always thought polar bears were white, but apparently they're not.
They're not. Their guard hairs, which is the outer fur, the longer fur, is transparent.
Like see
So it
through.
is see-through.
Wow.
And so what happens is the light actually gets in the see-through guard hair and it bounces around and it comes out and it makes it appear white. But if you were to look at it up close, it's actually clear.
Wow.
So that's pretty crazy. And that those guard hairs are so cold that when you look at a polar bear through heat goggles, when you're looking through trying to find wildlife across the huge Arctic, the polar bear wouldn't even show up because their fur is the same temperature as the outer air. The
That's
air temperature is the
amazing.
same. I know.
Wow.
So the way that they stay warm is a couple ways. They have skin that is black. So through their guard hairs, their skin is actually warmed by the sun, and so that warms their body.
Because the black like absorbs the heat, almost like when you're outside on a hot day and you have a black shirt on, you're going to be warmer.
Yes,
Wow.
yes. So it absorbs the sun. So through those transparent guard hairs, and then they have undercoat of fur, which is short fur that again traps the air toward their body. Then they have just underneath their skin, they have a layer of fat, and that helps to also keep um, heat in their body and so there's lots of different ways that they are able to just be out in the open and still be warm, which is pretty phenomenal because
Mhm.
it is really cold and these bears don't hibernate. And so they are feeding and caring for their young through these winter months.
Yeah, we did an episode early on in Nat Theo sharing some of the crazy ways that creatures give birth. And you mentioned earlier that the ptarmigan, the bird, will make a snow fort. And I just love that that's what the polar bears do too. When it's time to give birth, they actually make a snow fort in which they have their cubs and then they're together. There's even sometimes they'll dig a second room in the snow fort as a nursery for their cubs.
That's sweet. That's really sweet. Um, Another interesting thing about polar bears is they have bumps on their pads. So on their paws, they have little tiny bumps that help them give them tread for walking across ice so that they don't slip and fall. They also have little pockets in their pads that create like suction cups.
Oh,
So it
wow.
actually helps them really attach to the ice so they don't fall off. I think of them getting in and off and on of those floating pods of ice. It's just it would seem like it would be really difficult to jump
Yeah.
up on a piece of
When you're
ice.
that big, especially.
Right, right. Well, there's not a lot of things to grab onto, or there's no handles. So it's just God has equipped them to find food and to navigate a really harsh environment that is largely ice. So
So
they're pretty amazing.
fascinating. They are. Well, can you share with us? Okay, there's got to be more amazing mammals of the Arctic, I'm sure.
There are. So the polar bear stays that same color year round. It appears white even though it's transparent. The Arctic wolf also stays white year round, but there are several species of mammals that change color, like the ptarmigan, going from brown to white in anticipation for the snow and ice. And one is the Arctic fox, and it's about the size of a cat with a long bushy tail, which makes a great blanket when they cuddle around with it. And then the Arctic hare, which is like a bunny or a rabbit, and they have big feet so they can actually walk on top of the snow
Like snowshoes almost.
like snowshoes. Yeah, yeah. And so when you're a predator and you're white, it's easy for them to sneak up on prey. But when you're prey and you're white, it's easy for you to hide from the predators. So that color change is actually really great in helping them survive from the interactions with other animals. Besides having these guard hairs that may change, they also produce oil in their skin from a sebaceous gland. It produces sebum that covers their hair and makes them waterproof, and
Oh,
so that
wow.
helps to keep in the heat and keep the water out. The underfur, the fat. I heard from someone talk about caribou that they store a lot of fat called back fat on the near their tail, and so they will consume a ton of plants in the fall in preparation for winter. And then there's blubber, which seals and whales have blubber, and that protects them from the cold of the water. So this fat is a protectant and also a source of nutrition. With the caribou, that's 50% of their diet through the winter, as they
Wow.
eat from the fats storage that they have.
Wow.
Another way that they protect themselves through these cold, blizzard, icy snow winters is they hide under the snow. So some of them, like the ptarmigan, created just when there's a blizzard, but the Arctic fox will create dens and will stay in there when it's really really cold. But there's animals that create tunnels, like the Arctic hare and the lemmings and the voles, these little rodents that create this world, kind of like a big ant. They've got all these tunnels under the snow, and that snow protects them from the super cold air, and it helps them they can even access grasses and things through the snow in their tunnels.
Oh, wow. My kids are going to love that because one of our favorite winter activities is, sometimes we get some snow down here where we live. Sometimes we don't get as much snow as we would like. And so we drive way up to the passes on the mountains, like as high as we can drive up. And we find just feet and feet of snow. And we bring shovels and we build tunnel systems. And they'll make like slides where we sled down into the tunnels. And that's just one of our favorite activities. So now they'll be so excited to hear that this is how some of the animals in the Arctic survive.
Yes, very much so. And it keeps them protected from all those predators. Now, some of those predators have, like the Arctic fox, can detect them in their tunnels and will jump up and dive nose first into the snow
Wow.
to capture a little lemming. And then there's owls when it's not quite as cold. The owls will migrate, but that can hear them. They make no noise, and they're searching for these little rodents, and so pretty amazing. But another way that many of them survive is hibernation. So they go into a deep sleep, and the deepest, longest sleep is that record is held by the Arctic ground squirrel. And so they have the longest, deepest sleep and will sleep for 8 months out of the year.
Oh, wow.
And I know. And their body temperature actually gets to 27 degrees, which is
That's
below
below
freezing.
freezing. Oh my
It
goodness.
I
So
know
they're
it's
actually
really
colder than like an ice cube in my freezer.
yes, it is, but somehow they don't actually freeze solid. And when I was talking to the Arctic ecologist, he says that they will kind of awake, maybe not be lucid or like, but their body will wake up like every 20 days and just shiver. Like they'll
Oh,
shake and it will create heat and then they'll go back into their sleep mode.
they wake up
So
every
it's
20 days to shiver? I feel like that's what I do when I'm camping up in the mountains, like in the fall when it's really cold. And every like 20, not days, maybe every 20 minutes, I wake up just to shiver and
shiver.
then try to fall back asleep.
And then yeah,
Wow.
they're able to generate enough heat to just kind of perpetuate them through that 8 months of cold. And that they're pretty amazing. And they find little nooks and crannies to sleep in and survive the winter. So another really interesting, some other mammals that do interesting things. The wolverine is also has really big feet, and this is a really fierce predator that lives in the Arctic, and it can walk on top of the snow because of those big feet. But its metabolism is raised and they are able to warm themselves just by having a faster metabolism in the winter. And then other animals will huddle together.
Oh,
And I was thinking of like really small animals that would huddle together like little mouse family, but these are big animals that huddle together. So the musk ox and the caribou will be huddled together in large groups. The caribou can be over 100,000 caribou together.
oh my goodness,
And
that is so many.
that is a lot. It is a lot. And they will be side by side. And so the outer ones receive the most brutal temperatures and it creates a warmth in the middle. So they're able to keep their young in the middle and they probably can rotate. And if you're cold, you go to the middle, you know.
Wow.
But that's a good way to protect against the wind and the cold. So
Fascinating. Well, thank you so much. Jill, is there anything else about the Arctic that you wanted to share?
just I think that it's an amazing place, and I don't think of it as a desert, but there's a desertness to it because it has very little rain, less than 10 inches of rain a year in some places. There's mountains, there's valleys, there's coasts, there's floating ice. It just makes such a beautiful image in my head of what it would be like to visit and to hear the sounds and to see the flowers break out and to see a midnight sun, like a full day with all sun and all night, all sun, 24 hours. That's why they call it the midnight sun, is that the sun never goes down. And I don't know about 24 hours at night, 24-hour day of night, that would be really hard. But to be able to experience and see things that we've only seen pictures of
Yeah.
would be amazing.
I love that. It reminds me there's a scripture in the Bible that talks about the variety of things that God has made. It says, "Oh Lord, what a variety of things you have made. In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your creatures." And I definitely think of that when I think of the Arctic, especially now, just learning how he so wisely created all of these creatures and plants to thrive in this land. It's amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us. Last week, Jill, I asked you to share a favorite memory from your childhood in nature. So this week, I would love to hear, what is one of your favorite things to do in nature as an adult?
Well, I love to hike. Hiking is my happy place. Sometimes I go with friends, sometimes I go alone, but I am always on the hunt for God when I go on a hike, and He surprises me in beautiful little things. And it may be the spring wildflowers popping up, maybe it's through snow, maybe it's just through the leaf litter, to see them come up in their time. In the summer, to see all the birds nesting. We have a lake nearby us, and I love to see the eagles nesting and the great blue herons nesting, and hear the frogs singing, and then fall, just to see lots of mushrooms and fungi popping up in the woods, and just to see the beauty and the diversity of mushrooms. And then the winter, just the stillness, the snow when we get it, the frost. I just have this childlike wonder. I just wonder at all that God is doing, and I love to feel like I get to partake of what He always does, and to bring all these things together, and all this beauty, to remind us that He is the creator of all. And so I love to hike and find those. It's like I'm on a mission to find, what are you going to show me today? And so that's what I love to do as an adult.
I love that, and I completely agree. That is my favorite thing to do out in nature also, is to go on long hikes. I love long hikes, and especially during the changing seasons, and just seeing everything that's coming up and the timing of it all, and just God's design behind it all. Well, Jill, thank you so much for sharing with us all about the Arctic and Arctic insects and amphibians and birds and mammals. I will be sure to share with everyone all about your work and your beautiful book, Nature Unveiled, which you happen to have a chapter about the Arctic fox in. I love that chapter. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoy working with you, and look forward to writing some of the curriculum to go along with this.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you so much. Were you as surprised as I was to learn about the polar bear's see-through hairs and black skin? On Nat Theo, we often talk about how things in nature are not always what they seem. A polar bear can look completely white to us, but it is not white at all. And as we look closer, we can see how God carefully designed the polar bear to thrive in the Arctic with its see-through hair and black skin. I just love that one way God helps the polar bears live well in a very cold place is by giving them that black skin to absorb or soak in the sunlight's warmth. Think about this. The very first thing God created was light. Genesis 1:3 tells us, "Then God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light." And then on day 4 of creation, God really focused that light when He created the sun and the moon and the stars. Listen closely to Genesis 1, verses 14 to 16. Then God said, "Let there be lights in the sky to separate day from night. These lights will be used for signs, seasons, days, and years. They will be in the sky to give light to the earth." And it happened. So God made the 2 large lights. He made the brighter light to rule the day, and made the smaller light to rule the night. He also made the stars. So God created light and the sun to support all the living creatures and plants. Consider these ways that the sun's light helps things in nature live. Almost every plant uses the sun's light to create its own food through a process called photosynthesis. And cold-blooded animals like reptiles use the sun's warmth to warm up their bodies. Also, sunlight gives us humans a very important vitamin called vitamin D, which helps our bodies make our bones and helps us fight off sicknesses. The sunlight also helps our bodies know what time of day it is and when it's time to rest, work, and play. And as we learned today, the sunlight helps keep other animals warm, like the polar bear's black skin absorbing the sun's warmth. Without the sun, we simply could not live. And do you know what? Just like the sun, we also cannot live without God's light. In the book of John in the Bible, we read about Jesus coming to earth. He was coming so he could live a perfect life and die in our place to take our punishment for sin, so that we can choose to follow Jesus and live with God forever in eternity. Listen to these words in John 1:9 about Jesus coming to the world. The true light that gives light to all was coming into the world. Did you catch what this verse calls Jesus? The true light. And think about light keeping so many things on earth alive. Likewise, Jesus helps us to fully live. John 1:4 says, "In him, Jesus, there was life, and that life was the light of all people." Did you catch that? Jesus is the true light. He is the light of all people. And Jesus not only gives us life and light, but his light can shine through us to those around us. Listen carefully to how Jesus' light changes our lives in Ephesians 5:8-9. In the past, you were full of darkness, but now you are full of light in the Lord. So live like children who belong to the light. Light brings every kind of goodness, right living, and truth. You see, without Jesus, we are full of darkness. But when we choose to follow Jesus as our Lord and Savior, his light fills us, and it shines through us to those around us. Listener, think about how sunlight changes a polar bear's life, really allows it to survive in the Arctic. As the sunlight soaks into the polar bear's black skin, the polar bear can stay warm and thrive even in a very harsh place. Well, as God's living light soaks into us, we can live and thrive as well. Do you remember our trivia question? How long can a polar bear hold its breath for? A polar bear can hold its breath for up to 2 minutes. God designed polar bears to be excellent swimmers. And of course, as we learned today, God also designed them to thrive in very cold temperatures, so they can swim in icy cold Arctic water. Now it's your turn to explore. Go find some things in nature that use this sunlight. Maybe it's a tree soaking in the sun's energy through its leaves or pine needles, or a reptile, amphibian, or fish, or an insect warming up in the sun's heat. Or maybe if you have a pet cat like mine, you can catch them taking an afternoon snooze in a sunny spot. As you watch things in nature using the sun, remember how Jesus is light and his light gives us life. If you want to learn more about living light, be sure to listen to episode 13 on how fireflies light up. And if you're interested in other surprising bear colors, listen to episode 9, Are All Black Bears Black? Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to pick up a copy of Jill's book, Nature Unveiled, in the show notes. And please take a moment to share this episode with a friend. And subscribe, rate, and review Nat Theo wherever you listen. Until next time, keep exploring God's wild and wonderful world.